Peace, everybody. I'm Rosa Clemente. This is a show I was doing for a while, and we're going to try to restart it. It's called Disrupted Chaos. Definitely want to acknowledge so many people right now that are struggling with COVID, especially, pretty much everywhere. But our African American, Latino, and Native American community are really being ravaged by now. I hope people are paying attention to what's happening in El Paso, Texas, that they can't let people into the hospitals. There are now more tractor trailer morgues for people who are dying. It's dire. The situation that we're in is dire. So I'm glad to have a guest on that is an activist herself. So let us welcome Eva Longoria.
Hi, Rosa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I know how hard you're working. I guess first, are you and your family safe?
We are. Thank you for asking. We are in between Mexico and LA, mostly in Mexico. And Mexico is very, very, very bad with COVID. It's a lot of misinformation from the government in Mexico. I think Mexico had one of the highest rates a couple of days ago. So yeah, you know what? I have to say, we have to recognize we're in a place of privilege, right? Like I'm in a home. I don't have to go to work without PPE. I, am pretty removed from that struggle that a lot of our brothers and sisters are going through, especially Latino essential workers. We're 18% of the population, but Latinos are 34% of essential frontline workers. Your healthcare workers, your nurses, your farm workers, often going to work without PPE, working 2 or 3 jobs. They're keeping this country running. And so I pray for them, and I pray for anybody really who's on the front lines. But you mentioned Black and brown communities are being disproportionately affected by this virus.
Yeah, and I said Ava, and it's Eva. I know Ava. I know
no,
Eva.
It's Eva or Eva.
I know. I'm like, but it's Eva.
You can call me anything you want.
Yeah, and now we're dealing with this maniac as we've dealt with him for 4 years, but like it's almost like the slow burn of the next 63 days. Like no one is sleeping. We found out yesterday that he was thinking of attacking Iran just randomly. Like, why not? And I think a lot of us were like, listen, he's on some temper tantrum, like scorch earth, burn it all down. Everybody's going down with me, and I know as an activist that you worked extremely hard on supporting Biden and Harris, but like, how are you feeling every day we wake up and he's still the president?
I know it's going to be a long road. First of all, I would say, we all worked hard, specifically in the Black and brown communities, to combat the normalization of racism, the normalization of white supremacy, the normalization of misogyny in society. He gave permission to that arm of this country to, voice their opinions, and it went beyond opinions. They released a vitriol and anti-immigrant rhetoric and obviously racism and injustice. He just lifted up injustice, and it was like, we want to move past that, and America has spoken that that's not what we stand for. So I do think, though, the disparities in our communities extend way beyond a Trump, right? This was an easy election to me because there's a racist, bigot, white supremacist on the ticket. We're not always going to have that. Like, white supremacy and patriarchy come in many forms, and they're in many systems, right? And so I want to make sure our people know that we can't rest on our laurels and go, oh, thank God, okay, Biden and Harris are going to fix everything. That's not true. We're going to have to continue to fight this in the private sector, because you can't change policies until you change the culture. We got to change our culture. We got to change the hearts and minds of our brothers and sisters outside of the Black and brown community. We can't forget white people and white women specifically voted overwhelmingly for him. And so we have to kind of figure out why they support so much injustice towards us. Like, where's the humanity, right? And then the other thing is, the last thing I want to say about COVID is, COVID has exasperated a lot of the disparities in our communities, whether it's access to healthcare, access to even going to a doctor, access to get testing, access to good education. A lot of our kids don't have internet at home. They don't have a computer. They don't have a tablet. And now we've pivoted to online schooling. So most of Black and brown children are falling behind at a rate that they will never recuperate. So all of those issues and disparities weren't caused by COVID, right? So there was a problem pre-COVID that we've got to address and look at. There was a problem pre-Trump that we've got to fix, and we've got to kind of really create solidarity to face that problem, all of those disparities.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said, although at this juncture in my life, I am not interested in talking to white liberals at all. Like, I'm like,
I hear you. I hear you.
I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying other people don't. I'm at the point where it's like, now every time I see 10 women, 6 of you voted for a misogynist, which then also, you know, the way they framed particularly the white woman vote in 2016 was like, it was like the white women from Kentucky and West Virginia, poor Appalachia. I'm like, no, professors, CEOs, women that run big things. It's not this caricature of what a Trump voter looks like. I mean, I've been honest. I got people in my family. I don't talk to them anymore. I don't mean my immediate family, but the larger Latina, Latinx family, which I'm sure you have. And it's like, no, I'm not even, what do you, you're wearing a Trump hat. Get out of my mom's house. Like, it's not going down, you know?
But why do you think that is? Why do you think those women voted that way? Like, why? I would love to know the answer.
You know, I think part of it is just American psychological, this sense that we always need somebody to save us from something, right? And I do believe too that the ads that Trump ran were basically like, all these random Black and brown people are going to run into the suburbs and like basically rape your women and hit them and kill them. He kind of harkened back to The Birth of a Nation, the first movie, you know, one of the first movies that was about Black men raping white women and white women jumping off cliffs, and that was shown in the White House. So I think there's still that exists in our culture, that particularly like Black and brown men are the scary rapists who are going to run up in your house and take everything you got. It's kind of the same way the ads that the Republican Party put out in Florida with around communism and socialism, right? So, but at the end, I think Americans have this need to like, one person, please come up with it all and save us. And now we have people like us, other organizers, activists, public people who are like, no, we, the people, we're the ones that save ourselves. And like you said, right after Biden and Harris are inaugurated, it's going to happen. I don't know if he's still going to be in the White House being dragged out by the military, most likely, but we're going to have to be on the streets making sure that the things that they said they didn't want, that the people want, especially the new Green Deal, happens. That also understanding if the Senate doesn't flip, they're going to do what they did to Obama. But in talking about...
We still have that fight ahead of us. So I hope everybody in Georgia is paying attention, because that Georgia Senate runoff is the difference between blockage and progress. And we need to arm Biden with the progress that he's going to make. And I will say also, what you just said about, it's I feel like what we're tapping into is patriarchy at its finest. Like, as I do look at Trump and I go, how could any woman vote for him? Even with what you said about, well, they had an image of what a Biden administration would look like. And, but when he stood up there and he said that one speech where he goes, I'm going to get your husbands back to work. I was like, wow, there goes the female vote, because it's like, I think women today are now increasing as breadwinners in the household over men. And that just to me like was like, wow, how tone deaf that was to women everywhere. But yet women didn't hear that. They were like, yeah.
That the patriarchy is real. People are like, no, we've come a long way. I mean, when I ran with Cynthia in 2008, I always tell people now, when I look at that and process that if it had been a Black man, a Latino man, that they would have gotten more support from like the community, not the national community, but definitely the community and movement and organizers, because I had already been working in movement work for such a long time. I was pretty naive and was like, oh my God, the Green Party platform is everything we say we want. Like, why wouldn't people rock with it? And also understanding it wasn't like we were going to win. It's the Green Party. We can't even get on every ballot. But some of the comments made from brothers of mine, I was just like, oh, this is just straight up misogyny and patriarchy. Like, if you're on the ticket, it's good. But me having 2 women on the ticket, it's just the kind of things that people said was crazy. But let me see. There's a thing that came through the questions. Someone said that you can't come, or for me, that you can't come for white women when Latinos are dangerously anti-Black. Do you want to comment? Yes, in a second.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that people also know that the mainstream media did a horrible job. The poll watchers, all these white men who always get it wrong. I don't even know how they keep their jobs because they're so wrong all the time. But there's been misinformation that Latinos overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Is just not true. The numbers tell us it's not true. The numbers tell us specifically 92% of African-American women voted for Biden and Harris. 76% of Latina women voted for Biden and Harris, okay? Plus more people voted than ever. And this is the biggest demographic of young people, particularly Latino young people from 18 to 24 who voted and had never voted before. So let's get into like last week with the interview you did with Aaron over on MSNBC. So it's funny because I told you I don't ever really watch MSNBC and CNN, but I put it on and I was like, oh, Eva's on. Oh, cool. And I heard everything you said. And then the moment you said, but the real heroines, I was like, oh no, this is not good. I was like, let me call Carmen Perez. So for folks that want to know, Carmen Perez, Monica Jimenez, Ava and America Ferrera have started a couple months ago. She said where they're having a lot of presenting a lot of Latina women that you don't hear the voices, but also a digital home and platform. So I was like, Carmen, listen, if you get a chance, can you hit Ava up? Because I have to do this Instagram live. And part of the Instagram live for me, it wasn't just how you said it. It was that, it's also comes within the context of particularly like African-American women always being erased, And while I was doing the IG, somebody's like, well, you're erasing Black women now. And I said, listen, I consider myself a Black Puerto Rican, but I also know the African-American struggle is a very different struggle, and I know it and I study and I respect it and I'm part of a longer struggle. But, so then we got on the phone and then we all talked the next day. Once you were like, oh man, I stepped in it. Like, what was the reaction?
Yeah. Let me tell you, first and foremost, I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong in the words that I chose in that moment, because words matter. And I really believe that. When I was doing the interview, I was trying to hurry up. These segments are like 3 minutes and this is not an excuse or defensiveness. And so when I was like, get out how Latinas did amazingly. And unfortunately, I said it right after a Black statistic. And it was wrong because I hear you and I heard everybody. My sisters called me, my Black sisters who were like, whoa, babe, that stung me. And I said, the minute I heard it back, because I was like, wait, what happened? And then I said, oh, wow. And it was wrong. And I apologize, because how we say things creates emotional poison and it taps into pain that I think many of us experience, but specifically the Black female community, right? Because there's a collective exhaustion of being erased. You and I talked about this before, and I was really grateful for everybody who doesn't know. Rosa jumped on the phone with me at 11 o'clock that night. I was like, "Are you awake?" She's like, "I'm awake." I was like, "I fucked up. I am so sorry. How do I let people know my heart and my intentions?" Because I have been an activist for a long time. I do fight for Black and Brown communities. I do care about my Afro Latina and Black Latina sisters, who you walked me through brilliantly, often being marginalized in both communities, right? Not belonging here, not belonging there. And so what I found was, I have no ego in it. I am okay to be corrected. And I applauded everybody who, people call it a backlash. I call it education, and I call it outreach, and I call it correction, right? Like, we have to be okay for people to call you on your shit and go, "Hey, I don't care what your intention was. This is how it was received." And I was okay accepting that correctness. I really, truly am okay with that, because I want to listen and learn. And I talked to you that night, and then we had a war room the next morning of Carmen and you and Yanira and everybody who really cared about progress. You guys weren't stuck on I'm canceling you, Eva. We're done with you. You each said there is a pain we tapped into that we never talk about. And that's why I'm glad somebody asked the question, which is the anti-Blackness in the Latino community. And we don't talk about it. And you and I were like, hey, let's figure out how to use this as an opportunity for deep solidarity building. Because if we never address that pain, that historical pain that has come from the Latino community towards our Black brothers and sisters, it will prevent us from uniting. It prevents that coalition. It prevents our communities from coming together. And we just saw, when we come together, we're unstoppable. Look at what we did with this election. And not only Black and Brown sisters, our Native American Indigenous sisters, right, who rode to the polls on horses. And so for me, I am sorry that my pain, my words contributed to that pain, because I should be more responsible than that. I, who am conscious, I'm very conscious of this moment, and I did it, and I fucked up. Imagine the people unconsciously doing it, and imagine the people who are consciously trying to hurt us, right? So if I unconsciously did this mistake and was like, "Oh, come on, you guys, you know what I meant," that's not modeling the behavior that needs to happen, which is what needs to happen is like, "I'm so sorry. Let me hear your pain." And I have welcomed this conversation. I welcome the conversation you and I are having, because a lot of us have blind spots. And I think we have to rise up to when somebody shows you your blind spot and they go, "You missed it." And I said, I missed it. And I'm sorry for that.
Well, there's a lot of comments coming in from especially women saying, "Thanks for the accountability. It is appreciated." And I mean, for me, that's how I roll in movement spaces now. The more I've been in it, like, just take accountability and keep moving forward, but also,
not being flippant about it. I don't want okay, guys, I'm moving on. Yeah. Can we just get over? That's not the point. The point is, I felt it and I heard it, and I wept with you, and I wept with Carmen, and I wept with my other sisters who really cared about me getting this right. And I want to get it right, because I want everybody in our community to get it right. We got to get it right, because we can't do this alone. Latinas can't do this alone, and Black women can't do this alone, and everybody in between, Afro Latinas, Black Latinas, we can't do it alone. We have to stop being siphoned. And so I really, really want to use this opportunity to figure this out. Let's figure this out and have these conversations that are hard and uncomfortable. But I have no ego about it. I really was sorry.
Yeah, no, everybody felt it. Everybody's feeling it now, and it is important. But if we look at the bigger picture too, what I'm always trying to tell, especially younger students when I'm in the classroom or mentoring them, is that, America's anti-Black. The world is anti-Black, right? And first, people have a very not a great even understanding of the transatlantic slave trade. Because
Yeah.
when we talk about slavery, it's like it happened, Martin Luther King, Black people are free. That's like what you learn in high school. But if you look at actual records, right, and let's say 60 million Africans, 70 million were taken and used as labor and sold off. Most of those don't end up in the United States of America. About 350,000 do. So people go where the rest? In Brazil, in Cuba, Puerto Rico, the coast of Mexico, Panama,
Dominican.
and what we Dominican Republic, what we larger know as like Latin America. And I'll
Right.
use that term, but geopolitically, Puerto Rico doesn't fit in Latin America because of our colonial status. But the more I dug into that, then I began to look at the records in Puerto Rico. And by the late 1880s, they were one of the islands that took the longest to abolish slavery, but also one of the islands where there were many slave revolts, some of the first. But if you look at Puerto Rico, up until the mid 1990s, they didn't even teach about slavery in Puerto Rico. And I think I try to get people to understand is like when I was growing up, I was Puerto Rican. That's it. It was like it was not a discussion of white or black. You're Puerto Rican, Boricua, your family's in Puerto Rico. This is why you speak Spanish. These are our cultural traditions. I had to go to college and be confronted with the truth to begin to call myself an African descendant. And then within movement now, call myself a Black Puerto Rican. And I think although we're having these discussions, like you said, I think it's now time that we figure out how we as Afro, Latina, Latinx, Black, Latino, Latinx people are going to be represented. I mean, to this day, if I keep this show going, I might be the first. I shouldn't be the first. You know, if I am, that means my responsibility is bring in other people and build a pretty powerful, hopefully, a media collective. But that anti-Blackness has to be rooted out. And usually the way it's rooted out is when someone that you care about or your comrade will be like, yo, wait, hold up. No. Or it can be rooted out by saying, listen, I'm not going to the family gathering if you're going to keep using the N-word. I'm not going to subject myself and my family to that.
Important. Yeah, because look, conflict and debate are not bad things. They're necessary. Like they're necessary. So as painful as this last week was for me personally, it is a good thing that we had this conflict and debate to open up the conversations. And these conversations, you hit it right on the head, don't need to happen with us in our bubble. They need to happen at our dinner tables. They need to happen with that uncle who says the N-word. It needs to happen with women in our family who are like más calladita, más bonita, right? Shh, don't make too much noise. Don't stand up. There's you probably read that book, Well-Behaved Women Seldom Make History, right? So just be well behaved and be quiet and just sit there. But we have to continue to point at the problem, which is patriarchy at its finest, and systemic racism. Because you said this too, all of our struggles are different. Yeah, for sure, our struggles don't look the same in the Black and brown community, but our oppressors are the same. The system is the same that is affecting both of our communities in different ways. And I don't mean to say that in a binary way, because I do think it's hard being brown in a Black and white world. It's very hard, because we are considered white, right, by race. And so we do have white privilege. We are white passing in moments, but then our darker skinned brothers and sisters of the Latino community, whether they're from the Caribbean or Latin America or even Mexican, indigenous. My dad it looks very, very indigenous. And I remember when Arizona passed SB 1070, show me your paper laws. I had anxiety about my dad getting pulled over because he looked Mexican, even though he's an Army veteran, served in this country. I just thought, wow, I don't know what I would have done if that law was applied to my father, who's an 8th generation American,
Yeah. And I also, this binary that we're in, whether it's race or gender, does not allow for nuanced conversations, but it also, like people will say everybody in Puerto Rico is anti-Black. And I'm like, nah, dude, you can't say that. Like what you can say is the cultural upbringing has elements and aspects that are anti-Black. But if you're going to go to Luisa or Carolina or La Bella, those are Black Afro-Puerto Ricanos. And what you notice the most is that they don't have equity in their lives, that they can't even walk around. Like the people in Luisa hardly ever leave Luisa because they're safe there. And they're like, well, I'm not going to go to Isla Verde or Old San Juan because the police are going to mess with me. But I've seen in the last 2 years, I was like even 3, 4, this explosion of young people that identifies Afro-Black, and the 3 L's. So what I think people do also have to understand that there is no demographic data on us as Afro-Latino people. There's not a box you can check. It's not on the census. It's very like brandy on time to be like, oh yeah, let's talk about Afro-Latino, this, that, and the other. And a lot of those conversations are cultural, which are important. But I think it's always easier for people to latch onto the culture, but not latch on to the movement for Black liberation, right? So like, yes, we all drum and we eat the same food. Yeah, but you're still saying anti-Black stuff and you're Black. Like, and what it really comes down to is what Frantz Fanon, a great philosopher, said: colonized lands, colonized minds. And that particularly the immigration experience is just trying to get somewhere at this moment to have some safety. But then when you do arrive, if you're phenotypically indigenous or Black, you're also being already racialized, even if you don't racialize yourself, because the American project is one of racialization and creating race. But we can't, for me, I really struggle with those who call themselves Afro-Black, Latino, Latina, Latinx that are not doing the work, that are not understanding that, like, you can't just blanketly say like every Dominican is anti-Black. And if they were, why? Well, because they have a dictator, Trujillo, who was horrific, who slaughtered Haitians, who wanted to be so white, he put white powder on his face, to do speeches. He incentivized whiteness. Those things carry on into our psychic memory and trauma and history. So when we have these conversations, you have to give people a little grace and be like, wait, here, let me hip you to this book. Oh, wait, here, watch this documentary. Oh, wait, Hollywood is not only not representing Latina women in the variety of people that we are, they're also not really checking for Afro-Black Latino people, except the ones that are in Hollywood that also join and are part of this kind of thing. But I really believe you have to unroot it, like how you were talking earlier, that unconscious bias.
Yeah, there's a great book called Blind Spot, and it's about cultural biases, by I have it here, but I'll put it in your chat. But that's the thing, is like, educate yourself, right? I'm not an expert on any of this, but I'm pretty literate. Like, I love to read and I love to dive in. I don't know if you read Paul Ortiz's book, African American and Latinx History, and he really centered. Yeah, and he really centers unapologetically African American, Latinx, indigenous voices in U.S. history, which is always refreshing to me because we are left out of those stories. Occupied America by Dr. Acuna is the Chicano 101. I have my master's in Chicano studies, and that is the book. He's the godfather of making sure Mexican American history and people understand that. But a lot of that is decolonizing the mind, right? Like, and it's so funny because I did my DNA, and all my life, I'm like, soy mexicana de corazón. I'm like Mexican. I embrace it. And my dad always told me, he's like, we're not Mexican, we're Spanish. I'm like, yeah, okay, we're Spanish. And when I did my DNA, I was 85% Spanish, which meant we were the colonizers, right? Like through, maybe in the 1600s, right? And I thought, and it broke my heart because I was like, oh my God, I'm the bad guy. And going through my master's and really navigating that search for identity, which we all, like you said, there's not a box that you can check on a census, but why do we always have to check boxes? Why do I have to check a box to really explore this world in my front facing agency? And I that's hard. It's hard. And so I think it just gets more complicated when you are don't fit into the binary boxes, gender wise as well, right? If you don't identify as either gender, you don't identify as black or white, you don't quite, you may be Afro Latina, but maybe, I don't know. And then, oh, wait, but I'm light skinned, but I'm Afro Latina. So then there's colorism, right? And then on top of that, if you're queer, and then on top of that, if you're older, right? So that there's ageism and color, like there's a lot that are put upon us. And here's the thing that we cannot do. And this is why I want to unite our Black brothers and sisters, is you can't rank oppressions. You can't go, well, I got it harder because I am this, this, and this. And I go, yeah, well, I'm this. That's when it gets dangerous. And we should continue again to point at the problem. We're not the problem. We should all be linking arms in this fight and leaning in. I remember. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I get what you're saying about Olympics oppression, because it's it's something that happens in the academy a lot and talked about, but there has to be an acknowledgement that particularly it is African-American men and women that are being murdered by the police. Latino,
right.
Latina are as well, but the disproportionate state sanctioned violence. And I think what that doesn't, it often doesn't allow for us to, it means that we're in solidarity. And I think there's something also about not understanding social justice history. There's no movement you've ever seen where we haven't had some type of solidarity. If it's Vieques, Al Sharpton got arrested for trying to work on Vieques and get Vieques free. If it's about ICE and immigration, we're going to see African-American brothers, Native people, quote, American citizens, Puerto Ricans. We actually have to show up more because our undocumented brothers and sisters might not be able to take that certain risk. But there's a comment, and it says, between this, Evelyn Lozado, Fat Joe, claiming he's blacker than some black people, and J-Lo saying, Negrita, I'm tired. So what I want to say to Faye is that we also have to look at this outside of a celebrity context, even though we have people may consider Eva just a celebrity, but she's an activist as well, and I'm always like, we got to stop looking to especially rappers and musicians to be our political leaders. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know nothing about J-Lo. I know that she's made a very interesting career choice where she actually never plays a Puerto Rican woman in most of her movies, and has never been really outspoken. And that Fat Joe comment comes within the context of him growing up in the Bronx with African-American, other Caribbean folks, never really went to the island till he was older. And I think now there has to be an understanding of this new generation of Afro-Latino, Black Latino people who were born here, never been to their homeland, don't speak Spanish, and are in communities that are working class communities that include Africans from the continent, African Americans, Dominicans. And we're raised in that. But in being raised in that, it's like what you said. You got to look at your dad and be like, wait, we Spanish? Then we have a lineage of colonialism? Like, you have to unroot that for yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a lot that people also are unrooting, especially as the holidays are coming up. There's, always conversations, but you're right on about that.
I do. And I want to say, have those conversations with grace and have them with a viewpoint of taking your ego out and really being armed with information, right? Like, that's how I feel when I talk with my Republican friends, not Trump supporters, but my Republican friends.
Girl,
I know. I'm from Texas. It's bound to happen.
I know. Okay.
Republican friends who did not vote for Trump, who did vote for Biden, right? But I remember you having those conversations because we have to somehow at the end of the day understand we are more alike than different. And so how do we find those similarities and unite? And so give people grace in those conversations. I'm not saying that racist bigot in your family and don't call them out on it. I'm saying, you know, let's find allies. We need allies, because we can't, Black and brown community can't do this by ourselves, you know, and sometimes we just talk in our bubble. We need everybody to come on board. You know, I want to say it was Cornell West. Somebody came to my college and spoke, and they said, which is true, there's never been major legislation or a huge legislation done without civic disobedience. The women's suffragette movement, it wasn't a politician or president going, hey, you know what, we should give the women the right to vote. No, women had to you know, get out in the streets and protest and hold the signs and say, we deserve a vote. So the women's suffragette movement wasn't for women. It was for everybody else who didn't understand women should have the vote. The Black and the Latino civil rights movement wasn't for Black and brown people. It was for white people who didn't understand why we should have rights and be equal to everybody else. And so he mentioned that of how, like, these movements aren't for us, they're for you, the majority of white people who don't understand why we deserve equality and justice. And so we're going to have to continue. You mentioned it earlier about you know, being out in the streets, and once Biden's inaugurated, we still got to be in the streets. We still got to make our voices loud, because that's the only way things will continue to change, is if we the people keep putting that pressure to say, this is how it should be. Yeah, I think that's what I was going to
say. You know what, and what you said with you know, how white folks should be allies, like, I push back on that. And the reason I do is because either you're an accomplice for justice. I mean, I hate the word ally. I'm like, no, that's just another kind of academic, you know, visible movement term, right? As opposed to, like, you know, the citizenship that African Americans have is not true citizenship based in equity. But also I push back because them white people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing when you're talking to them, right? And the thing is that the reality that I see is that there's so much angst in white people and whiteness right now. They're being hit by the truth right now that this country is about to be on the precipice of majority Black and brown. So we know that as Black and brown folks, African indigenous descendant, what we don't realize is we can very well be South Africa, the majority ruled by the minority. Except in America, that minority will also include trillionaires, you know, like 20 families that have more income and wealth than the rest of us in this country, you know. So these conversations, like everybody's saying, it's painful. We have to listen. There's a lot of decolonizing to do. Yeah, that's what it is. And that's why we're gonna, you know, keep having them. That we can't, I don't think you could dispose of people. I do, however, find it a little interesting that your comment was like, it went so broad and so much negativity, but meanwhile, like Ice Cube and 50 Cent were lauded for being different. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, talk to the Republicans. Oh yeah, another Black agenda. I'm like, listen, we don't need that shit no more. And who are you as a grown man to want to be, you know, with a white supremacist? But the comment that you made even trended higher. And I'm like, that again it is misogyny. It is the patriarchy. But part of it is too, because I think your history as an activist and being on the ground, it probably just, it hurt. It hurt people, and you addressed it. But what do you think then, you know, in terms of how you see yourself moving in the different circles that you're in? Are you seeing this conversation happening? Are people like, oh, wait, I never thought of that? Like, yo, okay.
Yeah, I will tell you, let me tell you something that was super surprising to me in this lesson is my Afro Latina sisters. I always assumed they did fall under the umbrella of Latina. I could see where you said this. You opened my eyes to this, of like, you tried to join the Black Lives Matter movement at one point and they said, no, you're not Black. And I thought, oh, okay. but surely Afro-Latinas are Latina because of one strong point, because of language, right? So I have one of my good friends, she's Dominican, and she goes, no, I don't, I feel more shunned by the Latino community because of my hair. Or I feel, even I was like, no, but you're Latina. Her first language is Spanish. And so that's how we speak. And so when I was like, wait, you feel marginalized? And she said, yeah. And I had never known that, because I assumed all Afro-Latinas, of course, are under the umbrella of Latinx, but they don't feel that way. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's right. That's right. Because, and you're right, we shouldn't use a lot of celebrities as examples. We should use everyday people, and how do they navigate their life? How do they have to go through life not feeling ni de aquí ni de allí? And I found that hurt my heart, because I think I need to do more there. I need to dig deeper into making sure we are inclusive of our Afro-Latina and Black Latina sisters.
Yeah, and so for me, when I ended up moving to California, it was when Black Lives Matter was really rising. And the first meeting I went to, I was told that. And then I went and got my daughter and then came back into the meeting. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. So I did, and Alicia too, we were part of Black Lives Matter, and we're still part of it. I'm not active as other folks are, but I support Black Lives Matter. And one of the reasons too was I'm at that age where I'm like, you're not going to tell me to leave. Like, you're not going to define who I am. You're not going to, you're not going to tell me that I can't fight for this politic, or ask me why. So, and my follow-up to that is, I've always been more received in like Black studies circles, Pan-African, Black nationalist circles, like always. But
wow.
I do recognize now that particularly what's happening in Puerto Rico with this whole rising generation of Afro-Black Boricuas, that I'm like, that's the work. I've been doing this for 20 years. Our godmother to all this is Dr. Maita Moreno Vega, and everybody go look at who she is. Go check out her TED Talk. But what she always told me, she's like, you're not going to fit here. You're not going to fit there. You're never going to fit anywhere. You were born on the margins. You're going to die on the margins, and do the work. That's my mentor. So anytime I'm like, oh my God, Maita, she's like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? Okay, then that's it. What's the solution? You know?
And the other thing, I think along those same lines, people go, anytime, I think this advice for anybody who has to go through an uncomfortable moment, you have to remember why you're doing it. Why am I an activist? Why am I fighting for the Latino community? Why am I fighting for women's rights? And if you keep going back to that, then nothing stops you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm using this as a learning experience. I'm listening to so many amazing people. And what I have really found is there's more desire to unite our communities. Everybody's like, yes, okay, now let's unite. Like, everybody wants to move forward. And I found that incredibly inspirational, because, social media is not the end all be all of truth. It's a very specific medium. But if you get out of that into a larger conversation like we're doing, I think you come to find that people do want progress. People do want solidarity. And that was refreshing to me. And that's where I'm focusing my energy. Like, who wants to come together? I'm here. Let's do it. And we've created this amazing friendship. We're doing a lot of work in Georgia right now, and really trying to get the Latino vote to come out with our Black brothers and sisters there, to make sure, because there's always a huge fall off in a special election, specifically with communities of color. And so we got a lot of work to do within the next 30 days to make sure that for the betterment of this country, we show up again.
And before we wrap up, something you did say about, rights having to be legislated. So, like, we celebrate women's suffragette, knowing that Black women were excluded in that, So I wish that more Black and Latino women who were visible and celebrated that would be like, but Black women didn't get the right to vote. And in fact, some of the suffragettes were very clear. They're like, there's no way we're going to let these Black men get the right to vote before we do, right?
Yeah.
But what it is that we have to also question a country that always we have to have our rights legislated to us, as opposed to we have the human right to be who we are, for water, for medical. Like, these are human rights things. It's not, but it has always been in this country. Well, we'll legislate affordable housing. We'll stop redlining. Well, those things live on in a different way. But how
Yeah.
we've been talking about systems, at the end of the day, if you don't understand white supremacy and its first tenet is to divide and conquer,
Yep.
then we end up not by having conversations like this, but we'll find a way not to be in solidarity with the very people we should be in solidarity to. So
Yeah.
as you said at the beginning, we have to have, like, people who have this information, maybe a little frustrated right now, have some grace, because if you just look at the fact that there are dying people. This nurse said yesterday, I'm sure you heard this. This nurse had 5 patients die this weekend. And instead of the patient wanting to, unfortunately, get on a ventilator or talk to their family before they did, they were telling her, this is not COVID. This is not real. This is a conspiracy. You did something to me for me to die. She was on she was on CNN last night. I'm like, if there are people, half this country, who literally thinks COVID does not exist, or that it's a grand conspiracy to kill Republicans and the right, imagine the patience we have to have and grace we have to have when we're talking about issues that hurt and impact our lives. And once you come to an understanding of who you are and how you identify, it changes you. Therefore, it changes the nature of your relationships, or if you want to even be in certain relationships or spaces. So there was so many good comments.
Well, I will say, what you said, you and I both mentioned about, kind of read up, get literate about some of this stuff. What Black Lives Matter did beautifully was, when everything was happening, a lot of the Black activists said, it's not my job to educate white people on this struggle. Go educate yourself. And they gave reading lists. And I agreed. I was like, let me go do the work. And a book that blew my mind was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijema Oluo, that really walked you through what systemic racism was. Number one point being, it is a divide and conquer. And so we, Black and brown communities, have to have our antennas up right now, because, we won the election, right? So that means there's a side of this country that's going to pit us against each other. And we cannot let that happen. There is going to be a strong effort to divide and conquer communities of color. And especially, by the way, our Black and Latino brothers. Again, going back to patriarchy, if you see the difference of the amount of voting numbers, it was the men in both of these communities that need to do better. And so we have to make sure that we bring our brothers along with us. And going back to your point about the suffragette movement, I just spoke this morning to Congress. I testified in Congress for the National Latino Museum of American Latinos and the National Women's Museum. So both of these pieces of legislation needs to get passed so we can establish a women's museum and a Latino American museum. And I gave an example of, there's a statue of Susan B. Anthony. Who else was it here? Let's see. There's a statue. The National Women's Party presented Congress with a statue of Elizabeth Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott, 3 white pioneers of the women's suffragette movement. And it had an inscription on the statue, and it says, "Justice, not favor. Men, their rights, nothing more. Women, their rights, nothing less." Congress at the time in 1920 deemed the inscription blasphemy, and they removed the statue and moved it to the basement of Congress, where it remained for 76 years. So, and just now, some congresswomen have dedicated themselves on both sides of the aisle to get that monument that statue out of the basement. And that monument now lives in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and George Washington. But
And
that's
see
still not the complete story, right?
right.
So you go, if it was that hard to get 3 white women, the statue,
Out of,
imagine how hard
out of
to
the
include
basement.
out
Like,
of the basement. What about
right.
us, right? Like, what about the Black, white, Latina, I mean, the Black, Latina, Asian, Indigenous activist who struggled for that suffragette movement? So that's just a complete example that mirrors our struggles today that we fight as women and as women of color. Because if it took a long time for them 3 white women to be up there, like,
I know. I'm
what's
like,
our chances?
and who should be there is Ida B. Wells Barnett, because she was at the marches and she was like, we're
Yep.
not marching in the back. And what Ida B. Wells did after that was dedicate herself to recording the Red Record and recording many lynchings. And if people read her book, she also in the book sites for lynchings that happened in what would now be Southwest Texas, originally Mexico, and that a lot of people don't know the number of Mexican men that were also lynched. So I'm like, it serves the system for us not to understand we have these particular histories. So before we wrap up, I'm just going to put up a couple books for folks, because that's how you got to do. You got part of the work is reading.
Part of the work is read.
This is like the beginning. It's called the Afro Latina Reader. It's an anthology: poetry, prose, politics, sexism, queerness, all of this in different articles. This is a great anthology. I put on before, probably the book that most changed my life, Black Skin, White Mask. It's really good. Then, because he's like my hero and everything, and Schomburg, a lot of people don't know he was a Black Puerto Rican. That's a great
diasporic Blackness. Oh, that's a good one.
And for those that don't know, you heard of Schomburg, but a lot of people think he's German. He's a Black Puerto Rican exiled from Puerto Rico for fighting for independence. He was also part of the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. 2 more real quick. The Godmother to All of Us, Dr. Maita Morena Vega, The Altar of My Soul. And then the last one I'll put up, Poetry, Where a Nickel Costs a Dime. There's a poem in here that pretty much for all of us in the 90s and early 2000s living in New York, it was probably the poem that gave us like, oh, this is who we are. I won't read the whole thing, but I just want to say one part of it and then let Eva have the last word. He says, Mira, pana mia, yo no soy moreno. I just came out of Jerry's Den and the coconut spray on my new Shape Up is smelling fresh all the way up 125th Street. I'm looking slim and I'm looking trim. And when my compa David saw me, he said, Coño, papo, te paraste como un moreno, paña. Word up, kid. You look like just a light-skinned moreno. Excuse me. What I told you, you Black, my brother. Damn, I ain't even Black. And here I am suffering from the young Black man's plight, the old white man's burden. And I ain't even Black man. A Black man I am not. Boricua I am. Ain't never really was Black like me. Y'all leave that boy alone. He got what we call the nigger ricking blues. I'm a spick. I'm a nigger. Spick, just like a nigger. Neglected, rejected, oppressed, and dispossessed. From banana boats to tenements, street gangs to regiments. Spick. I ain't no different than a nigger. And this is from Willie Perdomo's book. And for me, every time I read this, I'm like, this is exactly what it is. Like, we are on the receiving end of white supremacy. That's the system, all the isms. But these conversations are important so we can bring more of our people to the table where they don't have to feel uncomfortable or not being able to be their authentic self and how they come. So I'm going to give you, first, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're doing so much work and
we're working. The fight never stops. The fight. No, thank you for having me on and thank you for being a mentor during this moment and this time. And I just have so much respect for everything that you're doing and so much respect to everybody who's working so hard. A lot of people are working hard. And so in my effort to uplift Latinas, I meant to uplift all women of color, because what we are saving this country. Women of color will save this country. This is my Bible, Occupied America. This is Chicana 101, yes. Dr. Acuna, really talking about, our history. This is a great one. It's really specific about the rise of the Mexican American Civil Rights Movement, but this is a sign. This was a sign up in restaurants, right? Like there's a great documentary called A Class Apart about the first Mexican American lawyer who argued in front of the Supreme Court, because he said, we're not Black and we're not white. So we too have to ride in the back of the bus. We too cannot serve on juries. We too cannot drink out of the water fountain. And the Supreme Court was, the Texas Supreme Court was saying, yeah, but you're white, right? And Gus Garcia, they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And because of this case, it was the same year as Brown versus the Board of Education. So nobody really heard of this case. He was the first Mexican-American lawyer. And when he got up to the Supreme Court, they said, sir, do you need a translator? And he said, well, if you don't speak English, I can get one for you. I mean, he was like, we are here. This is our country. We've been here for a long time. And he won that case. And because of him, we get to serve on juries, because Mexican Americans and Latinos should be judged by their peers, right? And so it was never that way. That's a great one. Well-behaved women seldom make history. These are very academic. Bad feminists. I love Bad Feminists. Roxane Gay is fantastic. But I just think, and then, so now you want to talk about race is my other favorite book. And I'm just grateful for these conversations, and they should be continued to be had. And I'm of service to us. I really am. And I hope everybody understands, the totality of who I am and what I want to do. And I appreciate you, Rosa, for giving me this space and for your voice in this movement. It's very important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for modeling what it looks like to be accountable and keep it moving. Like, we live in a country of particularly that male masculine behaviors to never say, I messed up. I'm what do I do to make it better? So shameless little plug. Yeah. If you want to see this show, I want to bring it back. Eva's giving me some tips on how to do it. But I am going to probably have to start some type of campaign. So I just want everybody who watched today, please share out all the other episodes we've had. We had Cornel West, Drew Dixon, Robin Kelly, Linda Sassur, Carmen Perez, Eva's now on the list, kind of thing. Or you could just give me something to donate and I'll keep it tracked. We're trying to hire 2 producers, clementerosa@gmail.com, or just hit me up. But I know that this is necessary because I know representation is necessary. And there is no reason why, if we are 65 million, quote, Latino, and a quarter of us are Black, there's 15 million of us that have no representation visibly or behind the scenes. And I know that She Sip Weather is one of the organizations that is making sure in those spaces that we are represented. So thank you, Eva, for taking time. Thank you for our growing friendship. And, thank you for the work you do, girl. I know you're going to be in Georgia for like the next 30 days, not sleeping.
We're leaving. We're going now, and we're going to be there.
Back. I won't be going, but I got your back, girl.
We're gonna make it happen. We got to make it happen. But thanks everyone for this conversation, and everybody who's listening. Spread the link, spread the word about where people can watch more of these conversations with Rosa.
Okay. Well, cuídate.
Gracias. Bye, hermana.
Okay. See you soon.
They don't want you to know the truth.